All right. Uh, just want to all the panelists and the attendees know that the webinar is live now. It is also being streamed at YouTube, and we are recording the session from this point onwards. Good morning, all. I am Utkarsh, the coordinator for communications and events at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. I welcome you all to our webinar, Costs and Incomes from Crop Production in India. This webinar is based on a recent report that the Foundation released titled Trends in Costs and Incomes from Crop Production in India. The report is based on a project titled with the same title. I'll now be turning it over to Sandeepan, director at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, to introduce today's speakers and say a little bit about the foundation. Sandeepan, over to you.
Thank you, Utkarsh. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are joining us today from. I'm Sandeepan, Director at FAS, and I welcome you all to today's event, an online talk by Dr. Deepak Johnson on a very pertinent topic, costs and incomes from crop production in India. But before we begin, maybe a few words about FAS. We are a Bangalore-based independent research organization set up in 2003, and we are dedicated to facilitating evidence-based scientific studies of rural India. In practice, we operate through a network of scholars and on-ground practitioners across India and internationally. We have been collaborating with young researchers, senior scholars, leading academic institutions who are interested in socio-economic aspects of rural life in India, as well as in other less developing countries. We have had the privilege to contribute to the research of UN agencies such as the UNICEF, ILO, the IRRI, National Institute of Rural Development, ICSSR, to name a few. And we have collaborated with a number of universities and academic institutions in India and across the globe. FAS seeks to study the dialectic of continuity and change that marks the development of India's agricultural and rural economy. One important approach that we have employed to do so is our more than 15 years old program of village studies. This program involves description, analysis, and creation of a detailed database on village India in diverse agroecological and socio-economic regions of the country. This unique data archive on villages in contemporary India presents an opportunity for all of us young scholars and senior scholars to study and explain rural change through in-depth research on in a number of themes, including production and productivity, labor processes, livelihood, migration, rural amenities, to name a few. It also enables research on the socio-economic characteristics of different strata of the rural population and allows for specific studies on sectional deprivation in rural India, particularly with regard to Dalit and scheduled tribe populations, women, specific minorities, and the income poor. And as part of this program, we have already covered 27 villages in 12 states of the country. Using this archive of primary data along with other primary and secondary data sources and through employing different methods, we have undertaken studies, various specific thematic studies, for instance, studies of the small farm economy of India, rural women's work, village panchayat level databases, education among children from diverse socio-economic backgrounds, to name a few. Our research has naturally contributed to a steady stream of publications. We have published detailed account of our findings in 2 book series, one called the Socio-Economic Survey series, the other more thematic in nature, the Agrarian Studies series. And we also publish peer-reviewed journal of international repute, a review of agrarian studies. We also, in addition, for dissemination to the wider community of scholars, we also organize seminars, lectures, and workshops as well as international conferences of larger scale. Now, coming to today's topic, I'll just say that a vast majority of our farming population continues to live in abject poverty. This has been documented in great detail in our research, in our book on small farmers in India. And the book, in fact, clearly shows that while a growing population, growing proportion of this farming population is increasingly becoming dependent on non-farm sources for income and employment, crop cultivation continues to be a major economic activity, a major source of employment and income. In this context, it is obvious that the incomes from crop farming continues and will continue to have a very important influence in shaping the lives and livelihoods of a vast majority of this population of the Indian farming population. And this is very well understood. In fact, it is quite evident from the many promises pertaining to farm incomes that have been made in the last decade or so, and the many farmers' demands and protests that have rallied around the issue of farm incomes. So what exactly has been the trends of farm incomes in India in the last couple of decades? This is a question of signal importance that this webinar seeks to answer. The webinar is an outcome of a collaboration between FAS and the International Rice Research Institute. FAS undertook a research project that analyzes the trends in costs and incomes from crop production over a period of about 2 decades. And this report was prepared in 22-23, released in March 2024. I must thank the International Rice Research Institute, especially Dr. Ranjita Pushkur, the principal scientist, gender and livelihoods, and the module leader in the evidence CGIAR gender platform from IRRI, and Dr. Niyati S, postdoctoral fellow, gender research, International Rice Research Institute, who have worked very closely with us during this collaboration. The lead authors of this report were Dr. Deepak Johnson, then an associate fellow at the foundation, at FAS, now a JSPS postdoctoral fellow, postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Economic Research, Hitotsubashi University, Japan, and Kulvinder Singh, who was then a research assistant at FAS and now a research analyst at the Ashoka University. Deepak, as you all are aware, will be presenting the talk today. And we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. V. Surjit, Associate Professor and Head, Center for Agrarian Studies, NIRDPR, that is National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati, Hyderabad, to chair the session. Surjit is an expert agricultural economist and a long-standing research collaborator of the foundation. With these words, let me call upon the chair to handle the proceedings from here on. Surjit, I request you to take over the proceedings.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandeepan, for that introductory remarks, for introducing the foundation and giving a brief background of the study. I'll take a few minutes to explain the background of the landscape of the study, and then followed by I'll take a couple of minutes, and then Deepak and Kulvinder will do the presentations, and followed by a question and answer session after that. A very good morning to all of you, to all friends who have joined for this presentation. And all of us know the importance of agriculture sector in terms of income and employment opportunity for a large share of the rural population. And we also know that the performance of the agriculture sector, particularly the trends in cost and returns and the structure of the cost of cultivation, are very crucial for rural livelihoods. It also gives direction for policy formulations, program design, and implementation for the sector. And those who are aware of the nuances of farm incomes, cost of cultivations, and have read about the debate on this, will understand how complex is the calculation of cost and returns from cultivation. The complexity in relations and interactions of the factor and product markets makes estimation of this cost and returns an extremely difficult task. I'll take a few minutes to give a brief historical background of the various attempts to understand the farm economy. Starting from the early 1950s, the organized way of understanding farm economy started with the erstwhile farm management studies, which started in the late 1950s. And this farm management studies continued for nearly 2 decades. The larger attempt was to devise a methodology to study various aspects of agriculture production, levels of incomes, various input use and returns, and then to derive a methodology to study the farm economy, so that appropriate directions can be gained for policy formulation. So this continued for farm management studies, continued for nearly 2 decades in different parts of the country. Selected agroeconomic research stations were engaged in this, and they ultimately resulted in the evolution of the cost of cultivation of principal crop scheme somewhere in the 1970s. So the scheme started with an all India coverage in the early 1970s, and with periodic changes in the methodology, this continues to be the most comprehensive source of data for studying farm economy on cost and returns from cultivation. So there is no other database on incomes and returns which can replace this CCPC study. So other types of studies have also contributed to this effort. We have known about the detailed village studies done at different periods of in different parts of the country by individual scholars, and also studies by the state agriculture universities, which has largely used the CCPC data. We are also aware about the attempts by National Sample Survey organizations who did the situation assessment surveys in 2003, 13, and 18. But then several methodological and conceptual issues limits its usefulness in understanding the nuances of farm economy, largely with the perspective of comparability, and all these are well documented. I don't need to go into the details of this. All these factors underlines the importance of CCPC data in being the only source of comprehensive data on cost and returns from cultivation. And I think Deepak and his team will be giving a detailed presentation on the various results, levels, and trends which they have carried out. In this context, I also like to remember the seminal work done by late Professor Surjit and his colleague MS Bhatia, who has used the CCPC scheme data to analyze the farm economy from the early 1970s to the 2000s. This has come out in a very comprehensive manner in a volume called The Millennium Study of Farmers, volume 14, I would say. The results were published in 2004, and I would like to bring out 3 important results at a larger level, which is also relevant to the results of the study which Dr. Deepak and his team is going to present. So he has analyzed the farm economy for nearly 3 decades, from 1970s to the 2000s. The trends in incomes, cost, in what direction are the incomes and returns per hectare moving, how is the cost of cultivation changing, all these aspects have been analyzed in details. There is larger state level variations with respect to the estimates, but then I would largely stick to the national level. So on the profitability front, this is for the period from 1980s to 2000, the decades immediately after the post-Green Revolution period, the gains which reflects the gains from the Green Revolution, but then slowly toward the 2000, the gains has slowly started withering away. So the ratio of gross value of output from agriculture have maintained a stable relationship with cost A2 during the 80s and 90s. So in terms of the ratio of gross value of output to cost A2, the ratio has remained largely stable in the range of 2.23 to 2.34 during this period. But then if you look at the rate of growth of farm business income, at constant prices, deflated by CPI, Consumer Price Index for agricultural laborers, that has decelerated from about 3.2% during the 1980s as I said earlier, the gains from the green revolution have started reflecting in levels of incomes and returns from cultivation, benefiting the farmers. And then the growth rates have decelerated to around 1.02% during the 1990s, towards the end of the 1990s. This is an important finding. But then again, the study, after a comprehensive and intense analysis of various aspects of cultivation, also underlies the fact that from the point of view of farmers' welfare, it is neither the price-cost ratio, not even the farm business income per hectare what is matters, but rather the farm income per cultivator. In fact, Professor Sen was largely focusing about the welfare of the farmer. So how, when around 64 million households are self-employed in farming sector, it's important to derive their incomes from the farming sector. So whether or not a household earns adequate income from farming depends not only on the price-cost ratios, crop yields, cropping patterns, and relative movements of farm prices to the cost of living. He also emphasized that it also depends on farm size and cropping intensity. And I think Deepak will elaborate on this in his presentations. We also should remember that agriculture is a state subject, and being a state subject, state policies have a larger role to play with respect to the trends in cost and incomes at the state level and further disaggregate level. So this needs to be taken care, to be kept in the background when we undertake these studies. But then the national level indicators, as I said, for the 1970s to 2000 are broad pointers to the performance of the agrarian economy. When we come to the post-2000 periods, we see a less number of studies which focuses with methodological rigor seems to have vanished largely by the late 2000s, except the village studies, which is being carried out by the Foundation of Agrarian Studies and a few scholars who are very keen on agrarian relations. Large-scale surveys, as I said earlier, NSSO, the situation assessment surveys has its own limitations. And I think the work which is going to be presented gains more relevance in this background on two important contexts. One is it complements the intense analysis which late Professor Sen and Ms. Bhatia has carried out for the pre-2000 period, and Deepak's and his team's study largely highlights the what is with respect to the post-2000 scenario with respect to incomes and returns. And it is also based on, as I said earlier, on the CCPC data, which is known for its consistency, continuity, and reliability on farm cost and incomes. So with this few remarks, I would invite Dr. Deepak Johnson and his team to make the presentation, and then we'll take around 40-45 minutes for the presentations, followed by a question and answer session. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Dr. Surjit, and for that wonderful introduction to lay out the presentation. So let me start without any further delay. We'll be presenting about costs and incomes from crop production in India with a focus on 10 selected crops from 2000 to 2019-20. Although only my name is written here, at the outset, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of Kulvinder and also the guidance provided by the team at the International Rice Research Institute, who have been mentioned by Dr. Sandeepan, such as Dr. S. Niyati and Dr. Ranjita Puskar. So, the presentation is basically divided into these sections. I'll first give a very brief introduction, although that work has been done largely by Dr. Surjit. Then I'll get into the methodology, where we'll discuss a bit about the concepts used in cost of cultivation surveys. I'll present detailed analysis of paddy. Although 10 crops are there, going into details of each crop is going to be very time consuming. So what stands out in each crop other than paddy will be covered in the second last section. And then will conclude with some general findings from this study. As Dr. Surjit mentioned, around 64 million in India are engaged, 64 million households are engaged in crop cultivation according to the data for 2018-19. And long-term monitoring of costs of cultivation has been carried out from 1970s in a systematic manner. And some recent studies, as mentioned by Dr. Surjit, have indicated a reduction in farm incomes. Now, there are a few other challenges which have also come onto forefront and which I would like to highlight with respect to the relevance of this particular study. There are regional variations. Some regions are considered as advantaged. Some are considered as disadvantaged when it comes to yields and incomes. Some environmental concerns have also taken up the center stage recently, especially the excessive groundwater usage in the Gangetic Plain, especially in the areas where wheat and rice are cultivated, has been highlighted in the recent past, and a need for crop diversification, thereby to reduce the advanced environmental impact, such as a shift towards oil seeds and pulses from this double cropping, has also been something that experts have talked about in the recent past. This report has relevance in this broad overall context, and we specifically look into costs, incomes, and prices for 10 crops from 2001 to 2019-20. But specifically, and to be more specific, what are the research questions that we address? First is about profitability. How has profitability over time changed for different crops and over different states? When we talk about profitability, the first thing that comes to mind are incomes and costs. So we look at the trends in costs and incomes. Are there any differences across different states in India? Then we know that costs is not some individual cost that is reported. There is always different components that's looked into, such as human labor, machine labor, material inputs, all of that. So we also look into the changes in cost structure or different cost components in crop cultivation. That's one part of the story which is related to input use. The other part is the yield, and that has a that determines the kind of gross value of output for the crop. So that is also something that we look into in this. And finally, we look into the prices that's actually realized by farmers as reported in this data set. And this is quite important because MSP is a topic that everybody hears in the recent weeks. There has been quite an interesting debate about minimum support price, and farmers' protest and demands by farmers' movement have also highlighted this question in the recent period. So yeah, so let me get into the methodology part. We use the state level reports released by the CCPC scheme. CCPC, as Surjit mentioned, stands for the comprehensive scheme for cost of cultivation or production of principal crops of India. And this scheme has been used by the Commission on Agriculture Costs and Prices to recommend the minimum support prices. And this is conducted by the Directorate of Economics and Statistics under the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. And they published both unit level data, which is for the plot wise summary level data, as well as the state level reports. And what we have used is the state level report for 10 selected crops. We consider 2 cereals, paddy and maize, then 3 pulses, urad, which is black gram, gram, and arhar tur. Arhar tur for international audience is pigeon pea. We consider 5 oil seeds, rapeseed, mustard, groundnut, soybean, sunflower, and sesame. Yeah, so Sen and Bhatia's volume, which again was mentioned by Dr. Surjit, provides comprehensive information about the working of the scheme until 2000s, and it is also analyzing the detailed data that's available from 1970s onwards. Some of the important concepts that's used by the CCPC scheme as well as studied by Sen and Bhatia are these. I would like to highlight these indicators specifically. GVO is gross value of output, which is on the left side of the table. It is addition of both value of main product. So if you take the case of paddy, it's a value of what is the grain plus the value of the product of the paddy straw. There are different cost concepts used by the CCPC scheme. In specifically three concepts are used widely, and cost A2 is the first one, which stands for all paid out costs, which is all the costs paid directly by the farmer for hired labor, physical inputs such as fertilizer, seed, insecticides, and so on. A2 plus FL is cost A2, that is all the paid out costs plus imputed value of family labor. So if family labor is used by the cultivator, that is added to cost A2, and that gives the concept cost A2 plus FL. And finally, comprehensive cost or economic cost, which is cost concept C2, which is A2 plus FL plus imputed costs of own land. That is, if the cultivator is using his or her own land, the rental value of that land is added plus the interest for fixed assets, or the imputed cost of fixed assets. Corresponding to these three cost concepts, there are three income concepts. The first one is farm business income, which is GBO minus cost A2. Second concept is net income 1, which is GBO minus cost A2 plus FL. And the third concept is net income 2, which is GBO minus cost C2. We don't define any profitability measure per se, that is, we don't name these, but we report all the three measures of profitability associated with each cost concept. And profitability is basically calculated by dividing GBO over cost A2 or cost A2 plus FL or cost C2, and this is expressed in percentage terms in this presentation. We report all the costs and incomes in rupees per hectare, and prices, which is a comparison with MSP that's been made, is made in rupees per quintal, and yields are reported in quintals per hectare. We aggregate all the state level values at the all India level to present the state level, the all India, the national trend. And for aggregating, we use the area share. So area under cultivation in each state is used as, share of that area for the total area is used as the weight for aggregating at the all India level. However, for presenting particular states are focused, and these are large states in terms of area under cultivation. The annual values as well as 3-year averages are reported. 3-year averages coincides with CCPC scheme. So the CCPC scheme implemented by the Directorate of Economics and Statistics fixes the sample for 3 years, and then they change the sample in the next 3-year cycle. So we aggregate or average these 3-year averages according to the cycle that's followed by CCPC scheme. And just before we go into the trends, we use consumer price index for agriculture labor for deflating the values to take into account the changes in overall price level or inflation. And we report the prices in real terms in 2000-2001 prices. And choice of deflator, the other deflators are GDP deflator and wholesale price index for primary articles, which are shown in this graph, can also be used. But if you look at this, the red line is what CPI-AL is. It is between the other two deflators. And on the right side of the chart, you will see when it is deflated, what is the value that is of the farm business income for paddy in base 2000-2001 prices. And you can see that CPI-AL is somewhere in between GDP deflator and wholesale price index deflator. Now, to just give you a idea of proportion, so if the value of 2019-20 has to be deflated to 2000-2001, if you look at the left side graph, you can see that the index value has gone up to 300. So divide the farm business income by 3, and you will get the value in 2000-2001 prices. These are the states that are selected. So because it changes in 3 years, sometimes states are added and dropped. So not all states we have data for all the years. Paddy is the topmost with 12 states for which we have data for all the years, but we have only considered 6 states. in detailed state-wise analysis. This is based on the availability of data and area under cultivation. Right, so let's get into paddy. Paddy is the most cultivated crop according to the Situation Assessment Survey of 2018-19, and this is the number that we had quoted earlier, 64 million. So if you look at the Situation Assessment Survey of 2018-19, 53% of all agricultural households that report crop cultivation in Kharif season has cultivated paddy. The coverage under CCPC scheme has also been the widest. It has covered 19 states for studying paddy costs and incomes in 2017-20 period. Now, if you look at the profitability measure, what do we see? We see broadly an increasing trend from 2000s to mid 2000s and going up to about 2008-11, when profitability increased from 187% to about 220%. That is, the total value obtained was 1.87 times that of cost A2. But after 2008 or so, it starts declining and it reduced to the value which was present at the beginning of 2000-2001. It reduces to about 189%. And this top line is cost A2, or the profitability for FBI, farm business income, the second one for net income 1, and the third one for net income 2. All of it shows broadly a trend of rising in the first half, just before the first half, and then declining afterwards. Now, what does it mean for costs and incomes in real terms? And this is real deflated values for each 3-year period. I would like all of you to focus on this part on cost C2 column. We can see that the cost, on income FPI, we can see that it has increased similar to the kind of trend that we saw in profitability from about rupees 8,000 to about rupees 12,300 by 2008-11. Then it has declined, and it has marginally increased in the last 3-year period, but it has not reached the level of 2008-11. Now, if you look at any of the cost measure like A2, C2, or A2 plus FL, we can see that for A2, it has increased from rupees 9,853 rupees per hectare to about rupees 12,000 per hectare. Now, what is surprising is that, what is more interesting for an agriculture economics scholar is that at the level of cost C2, we can see a predominantly cultivated crop like paddy has seen a negative income, NI2, for average for 3 years in 2014-17, and the average was negative 253 rupees per hectare. Now, how did the cost structure change? The human labor component in cost A2 has remained around 32 to 33%, although it has slightly increased from 32 to 35 in between, and then came down to 33%. But over the time, there is a steady decline in animal labor. It has reduced from 12% of cost A2 to about 6% in the latest years. What has really gone up in terms of share is the machine labor use. It has increased from 10% to about 20%. So nearly doubling of the share within machine labor has happened at the all India level. Now, average yield has increased from 34 to 41 quintals per hectare. But what has happened to prices? Prices, if you look at the realized price, which is the blue line in this graph, and the MSP, which is the red line, there is a sort of movement of both of it together until about 2012-13, after which there is, and this is current prices, the price realized by farmers sort of stagnates, and the gap between the MSP and the realized price increases. And if you take the average for the last 3 years, it is about rupees 200 per quintal. So if the MSP was about 1,700 rupees per quintal, the realized price at the national level was about 1,500 rupees per quintal. Now, we look into the variations across the states. We consider 6 states, as was shown in the earlier slide, and we classify them into 2 groups. Group 1 is relatively higher performing states with higher yields, and these are Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu. and group refers to relatively low performing states such as Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, and West Bengal. Now, what do we see here? It's particularly striking that if you look at the cost, there is a huge gap in the beginning in 2000s. So the green line is group 1 and the blue line is group 2. But this is sort of narrowing, although there is a gap by 2020. But do we see a corresponding narrowing of gap in yields? We do not. And the yield for the top performing states, this is for rough rice or paddy, it's about 60 quintals per hectare, whereas the low performing states is less than 40 quintals per hectare. And this is sort of getting reflected in the differences between the farm business income too. And that gap doesn't really close because of the variation in yield, although the costs are growing to move together. But this movement in costs and the narrowing of the gap is largely driven by the machine labor costs, which you can see that the gap is slightly narrowing. In terms of fertilizer use, there is still a gap that has to be bridged, whereas insecticide use was very negligible in group 2 states. It has picked up in the recent, but there continues to be a gap between these two sets of states. Now, human labor share, how do we characterize these two groups of states? So human labor share for the states in group 2, like West Bengal and Odisha and Pradesh, to be larger. It is about 41%. If you remember, the all India average was about 32 to 33%. And animal labor cost was highest in group 2 states, and it was particularly for Odisha, which constituted about 10% of the total cost A2. In contrast, the higher performing states, like to take an example of Punjab, if you look at the last year, the MSP was about 1815, like 1,815 rupees per quintal, and the average price realized by farmers in Punjab was about 1790, so 1,790 rupees per quintal. And it also had the highest yield, which was about 65 quintals per hectare. In comparison, Odisha had a yield of only about 33 quintals per hectare. Punjab also had the largest share for irrigation and insecticide costs, which was about 10% of their total cost A2. So to sum up, we see a narrowing or there is a reduction in the spread of cost across the state. So the last, the bottom 3 panel of this graph shows the coefficient of variation, which is this dispersion in cost measures across different states, and decline in the slope downwards for these graphs shows that the spread of the states is reducing. But if you look at the income, we don't see such kind of a reduction in the spread, meaning that largest and better performing states with larger incomes continue to have higher incomes in comparison to lower performing states with lower income. Right. So now let's go to the other set of crops. Maize is an interesting crop because it has seen a real cost increase by about 2 times over the time period. It was about rupees 5,000 per hectare in 2000-2002. It has increased to about rupees 10,000 per hectare by 2017-20. And but we don't see such sort of an increase in incomes. If you look at the real FPI, it has remained increased up to rupees 8,500, but it has remained stagnant afterwards after 2010s. Now, the price realized by farmers were lower than MSP for most years, but even then, the FPI was somewhat higher. Now, within different states, the case of Bihar is particularly interesting. If you look at Bihar's case, and this green line in this graph is Bihar, you can see that there was a sudden spurt in real incomes during 2000s, end of 2000s to beginning of 2010. And there was an increase in yield also. And if you look at the cost, which is not shown in the graph, there is also an increase in costs. And anecdotally, we know, because we have read a few articles, that Bihar had seen an influx of hybrid corn during this period, which has commanded some sort of export market at that point, which was sourced by different companies, which led to this particularly noteworthy thing for Bihar, which is not seen in many other crops. So the group 2 here, you can see it represents Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. It doesn't show a corresponding spurt in FPI or yield in mid 2000s. But even Bihar's story is not fully complete if you do not take into account what has happened afterwards, after 2010, when there is a reduction in yield as well as reduction in farm business income. It has marginally recovered in after 2015, but it has not gone back to the levels that were achieved in 2010. Coming to Urad, what do we see? We see fluctuations in profitability and yields, although has remained stagnant. Profitability has increased to 300% in 2007, but it has dropped to about 150% in 2017, and it continues to be lower. And yield has remained between 4 to 7 quintals per hectare. There is no steady increase like what we saw in the case of rice. So it is fluctuating around this level. Most of the years it was between 5 to 7 quintals per hectare. AP, Andhra Pradesh, which includes both Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in all the crops case, because we considered both of it as together, had slightly higher yields, was about 10 quintals per hectare in a few years, and these years also saw a higher farm business income for Urad or black gram in Andhra Pradesh. Now, prices realized is a case in point, and this is true for all the pulses. We see that the blue line was higher than MSP, but not very high in 2000s and up to 2010. And if you all remember, there was a big production shortfall in 2015 for pulses, mainly for Arhar and Urad. All of these gram all had impacted by that, and that had seen a very high price at that point. That is also getting reflected in the prices realized by farmers, where you see a sudden increase in 2015, and then it drops as sharply as it rose in 2015 afterwards. And we see a movement of price that is dissociated with the MSP, which is much lower than the MSP level after 2017 especially. Now here, I'm not showing the states separately, but Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Odisha were considered for this crop. Coming to gram, we see that real FPI has changed very little in long term, except for some fluctuations associated with the trend that was seen for all the pulses in 2015. It has hovered around rupees 10,000 per hectare, dropping in a few years though. We don't see any big difference in yields. It's around 10 quintals per hectare, although there was a slight increase in the recent years. But the difference in yield between different states are not seen. One state that stands out is Rajasthan, which has a low cost A2 because there's a higher reliance on family labor, which is a point that recurs in many other crops too. We'll come to it in the conclusion section. But this lower cost A2, you can see this blue line in the graph is what Rajasthan represents, and it is considerably lower than the national average, which is the red line. But this is not reflecting in a higher farm business income, as we see all the three lines moving quite close to each other. Although if you look at the last 5 years, there is a slight difference, but most of the years there is not much difference between different states. PGNP or Arhar has seen the lowest incomes in the recent years, and this is very striking because real income, NI1, which is income after taking into account cost A2 plus FL, had reached its highest level in 2014-17 with other income measures. and it suddenly drops in 2017-20. And NI2, the net income 2 concept, was about rupees 596 per hectare in the last 3 years considered. Among different states, Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh had a higher average real FPI than others, and it was partly on account of differences in input use and resultant yields. But both of this, I mean, the input use was driven largely by the increased machine labor costs and human labor costs, not necessarily by fertilizers and seed, although that had also increased. But this increase in cost for machine labor and human labor had also seen relatively higher yield for Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh. We don't show the state graph here. This graph is of profitability, which is of interest. We can see that it had reached a highest level above 300 at cost A2, or profitability for FPI, around 2008-9. It has also increased to just about 250 to 300 levels in 2015, but it has dropped afterwards, and it has dropped to really the lowest point for all the 20 years under consideration. Right. So mustard is something that a crop where profitability has reduced, but we don't see much reduction in farm business income. The farm business income has averaged around rupees 14,000 per hectare. Last 3 years, it was around 13,000 rupees per hectare. And that is largely because of the increased reliance on family labor. If family labor was about 245 hours in 2005, it has increased to about 279 hours per hectare. Although it has reduced to slightly lower levels, but has remained at the same level as that of early 2000s. In terms of the total cost and cost A2 plus FL, if it is considered, we see that 46% was contribution of human labor, whereas only hired labor is considered for cost A2, it is only 20%. So large labor is coming from family labor, and that imputed cost, when it is added, it becomes, human labor becomes the largest constituent among different cost components for ARHR. Sorry, for mustard. And group 1 states have lower cost A2 and fertilizer cost, but higher machine labor costs and yields than group 2. And group 1 refers to Haryana, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh. Group 2 refers to Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. You can see that the group 2 states have a higher cost and thereby a lower FPI. Group 1 states have a lower cost, the green line, but has a higher farm business income in real terms. But the interesting thing is that although the group 1 states have lower cost A2, their cost incurred for machine labor is much higher than what is incurred for group 2 states. Right. So coming to the other oilseed groundnut, we see real FPI has increased over time from rupees 5,000 per hectare to about rupees 9,000 per hectare. It has reached its peak level in 2011-14, where it reached about 13,000 rupees per hectare, and it has reduced afterwards. Now, seed cost is remarkable here. It has increased from 98 kilograms per hectare to about 137 kilograms per hectare. Both Group 1 and Group 2 states, and Group 1 refers to Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, and Group 2 refers to Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Maharashtra, has seen increases in both FPI and yields up until 2011-12. And there's sort of like a convergence if you look at the graph, but then after that, there's a divergence that's going in different directions in both the cases. And we see that the yield and both FPI levels are similar to the levels that were in 2000s, beginning of 2000s. Soybean real incomes have declined after reaching, yeah.
Deepak, sorry to intervene. Maybe another 5-6 minutes so that we can.
Sure. Yeah. So soybean, similar story. After reaching the peak in 2011-14, it has reduced, and real NI2 was about negative in the last 2 3-year periods. yield show a general stagnation after an increase. It is hovering around 13 quintals per hectare. Maharashtra has a highest yield, but the higher yields are coming with higher costs. So the green line is Maharashtra, and therefore we don't see any significant or substantial difference in the farm business income earned by Maharashtra and other states such as Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Sunflower has seen persistent losses at cost C2. Real NI2 has been negative for all the 3-year periods except for one. Human labor use has increased. It was about 347 hours per hectare in beginning in 2000s, and it has after reducing to a point, it has increased to about 343 hours per hectare in 2018-19. And data is available for Karnataka, which shows that real net income too was negative for about 12 years out of 20. And the profitability graph also shows that the bottom line, which is the blue line, actually dipping below 100 in many of the years, which shows a negative income. And the last crop is sesamum, where we see average price realized by farmers higher than MSP, but it has also seen a decline in real incomes in the recent years. Human labor use has increased, and it accounts for about 41% of cost A2. Costs have increased in Gujarat if you look at different states, and the others states are Odisha and Rajasthan. But this costs have given higher yields for cultivator in Gujarat, which has resulted in a higher average farm business income in comparison to other states. So this is the relative ranking of all the states, at all the crops at the all India level, and sort of sums up the story in terms of real incomes. We see mustard, rapeseed and mustard, and the thick line in the middle is the median level of income for all the 20 years considered, was about rupees 12,500 per hectare. Second was paddy. This is all real income, farm business income, FBI. And the least was sunflower, which had an income of about rupees 2,500 per hectare. This ranking does not change so much when we consider NI1 and NI2, although paddy drops out by NI2, and gram and arhar occupies the top 3 positions. Coming to the conclusions, from what we have seen for all the 10 crops, one thing is sort of clear is that yield gaps remain, and both one aspect which is not touched upon is the difference in yield for all India level compared to the averages across different countries. And I would like to highlight the case of paddy. Paddy yield was about 40% lower than in China. But what we see is that for different crops, there has been different trends across time period. Some yields have stagnated, such as in urad, sesamum, and soybean. Some others it has increased, but even those which have increased for many years, it has remained stagnant. But what is more interesting is the case of interstate disparity, and paddy, the example of Punjab and Odisha comes to mind, where the yield in Punjab was about 65 quintals per hectare, and Odisha was about half of that at 33 quintals per hectare. Now, the other thing that comes out evidently is the rise in cost of cultivation, while the extent varies across regions. Now, change in cost of components is clear. Animal labor and manure costs have come down for all the years, and machine labor has gone up for all the crops across most of the states. But what is also important is to examine the role of policy. And we see for some of the cases very clearly, for the case of fertilizer, where the unit costs had increased up to 2010-11 and then has reversed the trend. Seed cost has risen for many of the crops, many of the states, and it looks like this is an impact of the private players coming into the sector and becoming the dominant player over time. But we do not have data for saying anything conclusive about it. But the larger conclusion is that policy changes do have to be seen more carefully. And finally, the headline measure, which is of the profitability and incomes, we see that there has been a decline in recent years, and particularly associated with that is the case of lagging prices realized by farmers in relation to MSP. So higher costs are per se not bad for farmers if profitability is maintained or is increased, but we do not see that, and one factor for that is which is represented by the movement of prices and MSP is that of low price realized by farmers. We would like to end, and I would like to call Kulvinder to share some experiences of using the data, and we would like to end this presentation by highlighting some aspects which has to be kept in mind for anybody who wants to use this data set. Kulvinder.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for this presentation. So, Dr. Surjit in the beginning mentioned some of the issues addressed in the literature pertaining to the underestimation of costs, methodological issues, and shortcomings in imputation of land rent, interest, and working capital. It has been documented well in the literature, and then it is also noticed that these estimates are mismatching with the plot level summary data, which is being published by CCP by the CCPC scheme. So, though we are using the state level estimates, we didn't try to reconcile the state level estimates with the plot level data. We found some cost components are not adding up to the total costs. So we revised the total cost in those instances, and we found that in some cases the cost components are missing. Particularly in case of Haryana and Punjab, we found the quantity of seed used for paddy was given as 0 in recent years. Similarly, we found some outliers for sunflowers in input use. We used the prices and the per unit price, the cost and the per unit price to arrive at those numbers. We try to rectify whatever can be done, but we did not change the values, or we have retained the values where the instances were such that we were not able to resolve in using this method. Okay, so this is broadly what I would have to say about the data, that there are conceptual issues, there are mismatches in the numbers there. One has to look very carefully while using this data set. Thank you. I'll hand it over back to Deepak.
Yeah, thank you, Kulvinder. So to end with that, there are some limitations evidently in using this state level reports, and we have to be cautious of that. So finally, thank you everyone for this opportunity, and this is the cover page of the report, and the link is also shared in the Q&A box and in chat. So you can access the report for detailed insights and a detailed calculation for each crop from this page. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak and Kulvinder, for that elaborate presentation. And then I think you have the analysis, you have presented the main results of the analysis, but I'm sure the analysis have been very intense, disaggregated, and very intense across crops, crops and inputs. But then we'll invite few question and answers, and then we can take a few questions. Those who are interested can type in the raise their questions, and then we'll try to take a few questions, and then if there is time permits, we can have comments from the panelists. So one question, Deepak, is largely on any analysis of MSP has to be accompanied by analysis of procurement. So lower MSP but higher amount of procurement would still be more profitable than high MSP with lower procurement levels. So can you add something about the procurement trends too? So have you looked at, have you correlated this with, because I'm sure it's a completely different exercise, but then were you able to look at it, or do you want to comment on that?
So we haven't looked at the procurement trends. The only thing that we can say is this is a very valid concern and it is true. And for paddy, at least we see that when there was increasing procurement sort of costs kind of moving together, as well, that procurement has remained, but when even when procurement has not come down, there is a slight divergence in prices and the MSP that is announced. So that is something that has to be seen. Procurement is definitely one aspect of the question that we haven't looked into, but along with procurement, some other things like the prices offered by private players and the access to export markets will also play a role in the prices that's received by farmers.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak. There's a question from, I assume, Professor Zankaraj. Thank you for the fascinating. What is the rationality for the selection of these 10 crops which you have listed? So can you please?
Yeah. So this was something that the IRRI wanted to do, and we didn't have any specific criterion on selecting the 10 crops. Paddy was, of course, important because it is widely cultivated, and a lot of debates on converting the for crop diversification is going on, and therefore paddy was there. The other 10 crops were selected without any specific criterion in mind. But if you look at the top pulses and the top oil seeds, these 3 pulses and 5 oil seeds are sort of important in this categorization. So if crop diversification policy has to be formulated, keeping in mind pulses and oil seeds, then the other 8 crops would definitely be something to be considered. And maize was something that was added because it was another cereal which had seen some growth spurt in mid-2000s.
Yeah. And also a rough idea about, if you add up in the crop acreage, all these 10 crops, I'm sure will constitute roughly 60 to 7, I mean, at least to 70 to 80% of the total gross crop area.
Yeah, around, yes, 70 to 80. But in terms of cultivator numbers, the other crops are smaller. Paddy is definitely 53, but others are about 6-7% of cultivators. Yeah.
Thank you. There is one more question on from Wani M. This is a fascinating report and presentations. So she has 2 questions basically. One is, what can you deduce about increase in family labor use with respect to the yield, cost, and income? So how does that, what trend that input use on family labor brings in? Is it a case where increased family labor has led to increased yield? So do you have any conclusions on that? The second one is, there appears to be a gap between MSP and realized prices. So is this only to do with the procurement levels or any other reasons?
Okay. Yeah. So the first question about increase in family labor and yield, in cases where we see family labor has increased or remain more or less stable, we do not see a corresponding increase so much in yield. And this is specifically for the case of some pulses and oil seeds, where we see higher family labor over time, and particularly after reducing in the first half and then going up in the second half, we don't see a corresponding increase in yield. Yield has remained stagnant, fluctuating over time. And that is something that has not resulted in increased income. So it looks like, which is at this stage a conjecture, but farmers are faced with some budget constraint where they see their physical inputs costs have been increasing, which is adding to their paid out costs, but they cannot keep the same level of casual labor, and therefore they are replacing that labor with more human labor. So some sort of a substitution that's happening, which is not necessarily increasing the yield or incomes over time. Now, about MSP and realized prices, yes, procurement is one thing, but that the other part is also to be taken into consideration. For maize, we see that for most crops, definitely in the last few years, especially after 2017-20, there has been a drop or lagging of realized prices in relation to MSP. Part of it is, we think, is explained by the revision in how MSP has been announced. It has been changed to cost A2 plus FL plus 50% over that. That is probably the reason why MSP has increased, but realized prices have not increased. Could be one reason, but procurement is definitely a thing that has to be looked into, and many of these crops have very low procurement, so that definitely comes out as a reason to be looked into. But to some extent, how different markets operate, which is outside the scope of this study, is also something that has to be considered.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak. I think that's an interesting observation also, where there is an increased use of family labor. Yield seems to be stagnating, or not, at least not showing a positive growth rate. So that needs to be maybe further explored. Taking leads from this needs to be more detailed village studies, have to be conducted to understand the reasons behind that, maybe explored. Yeah. So another question is from Mauli Sharma. So there seems to be a widespread perception that India's MSP system for farmers has outlived its purpose, and it's therefore time to phase it out. Regardless of the veracity of the argument on its own, can you comment on it in the light of the fact that MSP has not been realized consistently over the past decade? You want to make some observations on that, Deepak?
Yes. So I think we have looked into it from, in another aspect, but not in this project, which was on this question of MSP being not realized and whether it has outlived the purpose of MSP. In our opinion, we don't think that MSP has to be phased out. Especially in the case of paddy, the reason why for many of the years it was providing, at least at the national level, we see that the prices have moved very close to MSP, was because there was a strong procurement system for it. And many of the poor performing crops, the prices are not high as MSP, and it has not been remunerative for the farmers because of the absence of a procurement system. So it comes back, the first question comes back to mind, whether MSP and procurement is definitely related. And if we see both of it together, it is not an easy answer to say that MSP has to be phased out and it has outlived its purpose. I think if at all a crop diversification has to be recommended at the current level of cost and yield, there has to be a good procurement system which ensures that the farmers are getting some remunerative prices to incentivize that they move into crops such as pulses and oilseeds. That's the kind of inference that we would like to draw from the trends.
Thank you, Deepak. There's a question from Suren BS. He's basically asking, the approach is more academic exercise, which I appreciate. He would be interested in knowing the unit economics of the crops. I'm sure you'll have later. Most of the analysis has been done with 1 hectare as land holding. Would be keen to know what is the minimum holding for such crop to be economical from a financer's point of view. Any farm model has been worked out. So maybe that question you can clarify, Deepak. The issue of has been done with 1 hectare as land holding. So maybe you can bring out the importance of standardization, for comparison.
Yeah. So that is something that is done in a CCPC report. They provide the estimates at per hectare level, because of course there are variations in costs and incomes according to different size class of cultivators, and that information can be obtained from the unit level data. It is not reported at the state level data. So at the state level, differences across different cultivators is difficult to find, and the comparison across states can only be made if the units are standardized for 1 hectare. So it is with that purpose in mind that the costs and incomes are reported at rupees per hectare point at that level. Now there is another reporting that is done by the same CCPC scheme, which is in rupees per quintal, or which is called as cost of production in comparison to cost of cultivation, which is with land as the unit. So cost of production is for producing 1 quintal of grain or 1 quintal of main product. How much is the cost? That is also something that can be looked into, that is used for the announcement of MSP, but we have not looked into it currently because we wanted to see at the level of cultivators, although they might be getting higher cost yield, they might be incurring higher costs. The cost which is incurred for cultivating an area of land becomes more useful from the point of view of cultivators' welfare. But the larger point is taken that the question is pertinent about taking at the farm level or the household level. And at present, given the data limitations, we do not have much insights to that question from the CCPC scheme, the state level report, or the unit level or the plot level summary data. But we have some, we have done some analysis for that from National Sample Survey's Situation Assessment Survey of Agricultural Households. And there we see that the income for a cultivator household has, particularly income from crop production, has decreased in real terms from 2012-13 to 2018-19. It is roughly about 3,000 rupees per household, if I remember correctly, and that has seen a reduction over time, is what we can say. But yeah, these questions need to be explored further.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak. There's an important question on, can you comment on whether the trend decline in profitability has continued post 2020? So do you have any updates on that beyond the period of your analysis?
Yeah, so we have done some exercise, but not part of the report. But what we can say at the moment, I don't have the exact data, but it has continued. There is lower income after 2020 and up to 21, 22 or so. We have checked where we have data available, and we do see that the trend has not reversed substantially after 2020.
Yeah, so you mean to say the declining continues post
2020.
Yeah. One more question, Deepak. There are studies related to the increasing labor force participation from women and old age people in rural areas. So does this have any connection with the changing trend of farm business income? Do you see any leads that the data throws up to comment on this?
We don't see anything particular from this data source, because it also doesn't give any gender disaggregated data on family labor. So, but of course, we know that this is a factor that has been going up, that more female workforce participation in agriculture is leading to a more participation from
and I think you need to explore more on the unit level data to get that gender disaggregated age specific data on labor participation, which is again one more question from Vani M, that given the declining profitability of paddy and challenges of growing paddy with climate change. Are there any other crops that you have analyzed that might be worth growing instead, balancing the cost and incomes?
Yeah, so one crop, if you look at the relative ranking, that is the best that we can do with the data. At the all India level, rapeseed and mustard, although it's a rabi crop, seems to be something that is offering more or less the same level of income or slightly higher. And the other crops which are closer to the level of paddy is groundnut and gram. But there is a huge variation in these two crops. Like the minimum and maximum or the interquartile range is much higher compared to paddy. So that sort of stability that paddy offers is not matched by the other crops, even including the rapeseed and mustard. So that is something that has to be looked into. But yeah, that's if we have to keep one suggestion, then rapeseed and mustard probably is something that comes to mind.
Yeah. But then a lot of other factors, agroecological factors, also play a role in this. There is one question from Mauli Sharma regarding the unreliability of state reports. I think you mentioned about the missing components of the data. So he's asking 3 questions based on that. Is there a lack of attention to these issues that is letting them persist? Can it be speculated to be intentional or simply a result of incompetence? And how can this affect academia and research at large? So,
so this has been an issue, and Dr. Surjit, you have also written about this aspect. But from the agriculture student or like a person who wants to look at the data, some simple data checks have to be performed, and that is what Kulvinder also talked about, like adding the total cost components to see whether the reported totals are the same as what we get after adding up. And if some things are missing, can we impute by the ones which are missing by looking into the other things? And then reconciling with unit level data is a tedious task, and that if data is available is something that researchers have to think about. We did not have the data available with us, and it was short of time, so we couldn't perform that. But that seems to be something that has to be looked into. But generally, if I'm correct, I'm not sure whether that is correct. Maybe Surjit can elaborate on that. There has been a concern about the quality of this data, especially from 2000s onwards, and that to some extent is tied with the funding and the cost increase for conducting this research. So maybe I will leave that to Surjit to elaborate.
Yeah, so maybe I think I'll start from where Deepak has stopped. As I said earlier, this is the most comprehensive source of data which is available on cost and incomes on various patterns of input use at a very disaggregated level. But then it's not short of its limitations, and those limitations have been documented. There has been several committees which have been set up to review the methodology and operationalization of the scheme from the time 10 years from the time its inception. If I remember correctly, every 2 decades there has been a committee which has looked into it, starting from Professor Sasan committee in the beginning. The second one was Professor C.H. Hanuman Rao committee, and then they have given very detailed, extensive recommendations to many of these problems which has been raised. But then the issue is many such recommendations, and if you read Professor Sen's book on the volume which Deepak was mentioning about, he has very categorically said that that many of the problems largely is because of not implementing the recommendations of those commissions. So that still remains a worry. And I would like to point about the fact that unlike the data from other sources like the situation assessment surveys or other surveys conducted by the National Sample Organization, these are not directly accessible by the researchers. It has some restrictions in using the unit level data, and that has largely prevented, in improving the quality of the data in long term, getting feedback from researchers and then implementing those improvisations. So there is some restrictions in, even though a welcome sign has been the uploading of the plot level data, the unit level data is still very difficult to access. So that is a major limitation. And as the other surveys have faced, the situation assessment surveys 2003, 13, and 18, I mean, there has been issues with comparability, which adds more to confusion than to bring clarity on these things. So those issues there has been a general decline in the availability of data, as well as more recurrence of issues like this in the recent past. And that is part of the issues which it has faced with official statistics at large. So that we have to acknowledge it, and then we have to place the findings from this analysis in that background. I would like to point out one more issue with respect to the use of CCPC data. Professor Sen has largely elaborated it, and then in their own studies, they say that the scheme covers largely annual crops, and perennial crops are not covered under the purview of scheme. Although they collect data on that, it's not being analyzed. That leaves out about, in their own estimates, they have compared the gross value of output estimates from the CCPC scheme versus the National Account Statistics, National Accounts estimate. So they say that roughly there is a 15 to 30% gap in the gross value of output. We should also take into account the changes in the cropping pattern and diversification because of the external changes which is happening in the agrarian economy, diversification to horticulture crops. So those gaps still remains. So these results have to be analyzed or interpreted in the background of the fact that 15 to 30% of the gross value output is not captured from the CCPC scheme. So the results have to be interpreted with caution in that way. And as the researchers have earlier pointed out, they have given a broad trends for the state, but then agriculture being a state-specific subject, there are state-specific issues which need to be largely aligned with these results to understand it. These are broad indicators. The declining farm profitability and the rising cost of cultivation are broad indicators, need to be placed in the background of the state-specific policies. One example is the case of groundnut, where the study shows that the yield levels of the state analyzed have, in the case of groundnut, have converged in 2010, but then it diverges later. So what is the reason behind this divergence need to be further explored. So the results shows enough leads to what has been the trends. Similarly, in the case of IRRI, where there is the price suddenly dips in the post 2010 period. I mean, largely because to speculate on that, largely maybe because there is a rise in import at that time. 2013 to 16 were drought years, and then there was a policy for importing pulses at large from imported even from Australian African countries, and then there has been increase in supply. So these could be the reasons for that. So we need to look at specific policy landscape at that point of time to understand these and interpret these results. So again, the major results from the study are important pointers to the performance of the agrarian economy, specific with respect to specific crops, with respect to states, and the analysis have to go further intense from this level. but then these are warning signals which needs to be taken care of. So I think in the interest of time, Deepak, if you want to respond to any of these questions, or if you want to add something, Deepak or Kulvinder, you can have briefly, you can do that, and then
just one point is about the question about organic farming and traditional knowledge. So something that we cannot see from this data set because it is at the level of state, so it's very difficult to segregate this. So something that we cannot, we haven't done in this report. And then, that also applies to agroecological method of cultivation. We cannot say anything from this report, although we have some broader trends, something that can be seen from other places. Yeah. So something about market price and MSP. So that also I would like to answer that the price that is reported by the scheme is price that is realized by farmers. So that is not the wholesale price, because this is more closer probably to farm gate prices, because this is they calculate the total value of main product and byproduct, and then divide by the quantity of product, and that is how this implicit rate or the price is calculated. So because it's an average, of course there are limitations to work with this, and it is a broad comparison that can only be made with MSP. So it also will vary to some extent with the wholesale price, if you look at the wholesale price that is prevailing in the market. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you, Surjit.
Yeah, so I think if there are no further questions or comments which need to be added up, I think we can close this now. Sandeepan, do you want to add some remarks to?
We'll just thank you, Surjit, and thank you, Deepak and Kulvinder. We would now close with a vote of thanks, but I would just like to say that the attendance today to this event really shows the interest, persisting interest on this topic. So, and there are many questions that have been raised that we were not able to, given the constraints of time, we were not able to do the kind of justice that we would have wanted to. But that really inspires us to study this question further, and maybe engage, maybe in the form of a workshop or something that we would discuss with both Dr. Deepak and Dr. Surjit, and see if we can, sort of do something as a follow-up to today's event. So that it's really, apart from the fact that it was a very enriching discussion and very insightful lecture, the participation and the question answers have also been very inspiring, and maybe we'll look forward to follow this work in near future. With these words, I will hand it over to my colleague Utkarsh for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sandeepan. Thank you, Dr. Surjit. I'll only take a couple of minutes to propose the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Deepak Johnson for his informative presentation. I hope it was as enriching for him as it was for us. I would like to thank Kulvinder Singh for his valuable inputs. We are grateful to Dr. Surjit for chairing this session and for his insightful comments. I'm also thankful to the online team at FAS, Sandeepan, Tapas, Setu, for their role in conducting the seminar very smoothly. A special thanks to my colleagues Rakesh and Sai for their valuable help in the social media efforts. We thank the International Rice Research Institute, IRRI, for all their support. We also wish to thank Rahul from the Free Software Movement of Karnataka for all the technical support he has provided for the webinar. Last but not the least, we are grateful to all the attendees for participating and making this a lively discussion. Given the importance of this work for Indian economy and agricultural policy, we have been running a social media series based on this report under the hashtag Trends in Costs and Incomes. You can always look them up if you're interested. You can find us on social media at FAS Agri Studies on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I request that you follow us on these platforms, not just get updates about our events, but also about our other work. To know more about the foundation and the work we do, please visit our website, fas.org.in. We have shared the email address of the speaker and the link to the report in the chat box. You can contact the speaker for any queries, or you can access the report through the link. We'll be ending the session with this. Once again, thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.